I'm really confused. I don't know if I need to speak in English or in Hebrew. I'll go for English? Okay. But I wrote the notes in Hebrew. So I'll translate it real time. First of all, thank you very much for inviting me. And Ido, the subject matter that I was supposed to talk about is opportunities and challenges, but you already covered it. So I'll try in 15 minutes to give you some points from my own vantage point as an investor in the Israeli ecosystem for the last 30 years. Let me say that we're entering the fourth decade of venture capital in Israel, and I believe that the coming decade is going to be much more exciting, much more beneficial than the previous 3 decades. Just in the first 6 months of this year, Israeli companies raised almost $12 billion, and last year, $10 billion were invested, and we have all the data that shows that this year, most likely, the investment level will break a glass ceiling of $20 billion. It's quite amazing. Another data point is that 12 companies, Israeli companies, went public in the US in the first 6 months. And that number clearly shows a very clear trend that we have. Israeli entrepreneurs, it's a new generation of entrepreneurs that are building a new generation of enterprises. They focus on growth. They take these companies public. They don't sell them. And as they go public, they start scaling up and scaling out organically, but also through acquisitions. Just in the first 6 months of 2021, 41 acquisitions done by Israeli companies were recorded. So let me point a few points for you on why I think the opportunities are so big. The first point is that demand for innovation is on the rise. Post-COVID-19, consumers as well as enterprises got used to use technology. They started to work at home, shopping at home, doing remote learning, of course, visiting the doctors online. The demand for networks, for data, for applications is on the rise, and people got used to use it in the last couple of years like we did not expect in the next decade. That drives tremendous demand for Israeli technology. In addition to that, the digital transformation they started about 3 decades ago, or in other words, moving from matter to bits, or from hardware to software, continues to scale in different industries that did not see that transformation in a significant way in the last decade. Areas like transportation, financial services, healthcare, and so on and so forth. Another data point is that we're moving from a world of wars to a world of threats. Too slowly, we're living the world of wars, but we are entering a world of threats. And I think COVID-19 showed what it means. It means that something hits all of us together at once, does not distinguish between gender or religious or nationalities. And the only way for us to win is to work side by side in collaboration and use innovation in order to overcome the challenges. So if you think about it, close to about 100 years ago, the world, it's less than 100 years ago, but just for the sake of rounding the numbers, the Second World War, basically the world ruined its economy in order to kill each other. And in this war against the coronavirus, we again ruined our economy, but this time in order to save lives. So it doesn't make sense anymore to fight and kill each other, but it does make sense to work shoulder to shoulder and save more and more lives and make the world much more sustainable than it is. Another thing that drives this decade is that availability of capital is really amazing. I mean, in previous decades, what we saw is people try to leverage growth companies in order to liquidate them through IPOs or M&As. But now, when you distribute cash to your investors, they say, there's nothing I can do with it. Let's just keep growing. And so there is a transition from liquidity to growth. People are willing to give up on liquidity just to fulfill growth. This is why we see mega funds, mega rounds. Let me say that just in the first 6 months of 2021, 38 Israeli companies raised single rounds. Each one of them was more than $100 million to fulfill growth. The availability of cash is unbelievable, and Israel certainly is taking advantage of that in order to scale. Another thing that is also working for us very well is the fact that automation, AI, distribution capabilities, breaking borders, allowing Israelis for the first time to leave the concept of living on an island and to feel that we are sailing a ship. And basically, we can compete head-to-head with every company today in the world. We are narrowing the gaps that we had with places like Silicon Valley or other places, and we are seeing a new generation of startups and entrepreneurs. The cultural change from developing something and selling it to a global company is transitioning into let's compete, let's build, let's grow, let's become a nation that is offering category leaders that can scale into new heights. So that cultural and infrastructure change is allowing our companies really to leave the concept of exit into the concept of grow and build. What we see in the transition from Meta to Bits is new business models are arising. We see software as a service, we see shared economy. All that allows us to scale our businesses very, very fast. Of course, making decisions nowadays at the enterprise level is moving into the hands of people that are technology drivers, developers and people that are responsible for technology, because technology drives business today. And the way for us to come back to our economy out of the crisis is to be much more resilient and to be much more productive. There's no better way to do it than technology. And about 30 million people around the world are decision makers today in enterprise. And they are not the marketing guys, they're not the sales guys, they are developers, they are technology guys, because they are the ones who are driving the business. Another interesting point is basically the new peace agreements that Israel is signing. Well, it's not just to free up the investments from the Gulf states. It opened up more and more countries, more and more markets, and not only in the region, but actually global economy is finding more interest in Israel, and markets that were not available with us. They were not available to us, and we were not accessing those markets. Now, with our partners in the region, we can actually address those new markets that we never knew before. And I see more and more Israeli companies finding partnerships in that area in order to scale their business in a dramatic way. And I believe that in the next years, we'll see some partnerships that we never saw before, scaling companies. And I know because some of them are Pitango companies. But we have challenges. Not everything is clear, not everything is good. Let me put some of those points in front of you to describe the challenges that we have, things that we need to mitigate. Not with an order of importance or magnitude, but let me just touch a few points. The first one, I think, is a challenge for Israel to keep their seat at the front row of technology and innovation, because Israel is a country that started with innovation and grew with innovation. Basically, in our history, in the last 100 years, you can see innovation in every step of the way. It started with Herzl's vision of a new state, the Altneuland, creating a new society, new institutions, new culture. It continued with settling down when we used innovation in order to provide better food and water and energy because we were blessed with nothingness. We moved into the third generation, or the third step, of building our defense industry based on science, technology, and innovation, from nuclear facility all the way to cyber, because nothing could protect us. No mountains, no valleys, no oceans, no stormy weathers. So everything we did was actually with our brain power. And in the 80s, the Israeli economy reached a point where it crashed and collapsed and imploded with about 450% inflation rate. That was a turning point where we shifted gears towards building what we call the startup nation, inviting global enterprises to come to Israel and building startup companies to scale. We have about 7,000 startup companies at different stages, and we have about 500 global enterprises. Most of them have a footprint in Israel, but not all of them. But they are part of the ecosystem. And how do you keep the front seat in terms of innovation? We were driven by necessity to settle down, to protect ourselves, to take care of our economy. But things are changing right now. So let's take, for example, food. When you have to grow food, you develop amazing agriculture. But nowadays, in agriculture, the innovation is not a necessity, it comes with a purpose. We want to make better food. We want to make food not out of animals, but still eat meat. That's not a necessity, that's a purpose, that's a decision. And basically, there is a transformation from innovation driven by necessity to innovation driven by purpose. Of course, there's also necessity because we need to take care of the world. We need to take care of climate change. We need to take care of pandemics. But we are now working with an aim, a target, to make the world much more sustainable, to make our society much more inclusive, and to take care and balance our growth and our innovation with doing good and not only doing fantastic economically. So how do you keep the source of innovation that came from military? We basically picked at cyber, right? It was agriculture, water, energy, communication. We reached cyber at the peak. But now that we are moving to new technologies for agriculture, for water, we're moving into quantum computing, it's not necessarily coming from the same sources and not with the same drive. So that's one challenge. The other one is people. We are a small nation. And we have great talent, and we're creating more talent, but the competition on talent is so dramatic, and you have two forces fighting over it. The global companies that look for great people to develop their AI and so on, and they are willing to pay endless amounts of money for good talent. On the other hand, we have startups that rise all the time. I'm not worried about Israel not being able to create more startups. I'm worried about our ability to create the momentum and maintain the momentum to become a scale-up nation, not just a source of innovation. So the world needs to fix this. It cannot be any more education and then placement in a company, recruitment, and perfecting your profession to what the company needs. You have to take all that, the education, the employment, and the executive search, and bring all of them together so we can work in parallel and create more talent in order to fulfill the jobs that are being created in a growing rapid pace. So people is a big challenge for all of us. Another challenge is, how do you keep your economy inclusive? How do you keep the inequalities not growing too fast, but at the same time grow faster than the others? Because that's what we need to do. So there's a lot of challenges in what do you do in different parts in your society. When you look, for example, at vaccination, we all know that Israel is not one society. We have different parts of our society that behave in a different way. But a certain part of our society really adapted to vaccination and grew very fast, and we did very well. But when it got to the other societies that are not vaccinating fast enough, we started to see a plateau. And actually, Israel, that did very well at the beginning, did not do so well later on. So how do you make that society one? How do you make it inclusive? How do you keep the inequalities at a low point? The clock is showing me that I have about 45 minutes. I knew that I won't be able to make it. So just maybe to point out the last point. There are new rules to the game, new rules that are called ESG. environment, social, and government. The startup community does not know how to deal with it yet. We are lagging behind the world. The pressure is on the big companies, from the big investors. You have to be compatible with the environment. You have to take care of your people. And things like Black Lives Matter or things like Me Too that arose in the US not necessarily got quickly enough to Israel. So we have to make sure that we are not just a startup nation that's coming up with innovation, but we are also capable to be part of the global ecosystem by driving our own values and connecting to those ideas. To summarize, I have to leave. Amazing opportunities, unprecedented decade ahead of us. I'm very, very optimistic, not because I was born to an optimistic person, but I believe in Israel, I believe in innovation, I believe in the future, and I believe that what we saw so far is just the beginning. Thank you so much.